Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Brian's Horror Corner, and welcome to this horror movie review for day 20 of my 31 Days of Halloween Horror series. So, today we're going to take a look at a sequel to a movie that I watched and reviewed for the first time back in May in my May 31 Horror Movies in May series. I'll give you a hint. Boy! That's right, Phantasm. So, of course, today we're going to take a look at Phantasm II. So yeah, I if you saw my review for Phantasm, I really enjoyed that movie. I thought it was really creepy, very surreal, and just kind of just really weird and scary. Well, maybe not scary, but definitely eerie and creepy is a better way to say it. So I was interested to check out Phantasm 2, which came out almost a decade later. So let's just go ahead and get into it. So Phantasm 2 is a 1988 American science fiction action horror film and a sequel to Phantasm. It was written and directed by Don Coscarelli and stars Angus Scrimm, James LeGros, and Reggie Bannister. The first film's protagonist, Mike, recently released from a mental institution, recruits Reggie and some new friends to defeat the villain, Tall Man. So basically, the film opens with a young woman named Liz Reynolds, whose psychic bond to Mike Pearson and the Tall Man manifests in the form of prophetic nightmares. Liz pleads for Mike to find her, and she fears that when her grandfather dies, the Tall Man will take him. The scene then transitions where the first film left off. The Tall Man and his minions attempt to kidnap Mike, but Reggie manages to save him by blowing up the house. In 1986, after being institutionalized for 7 years, Mike, now 19, has faked his recovery to get released. That night, he returns to Morningside Cemetery where he proceeds to dig up graves. Reggie interrupts him and explains that what happened in 1978 and the Tall Man were not real. In response, Mike reveals all the coffins are exhumed and empty and urges Reggie to help him hunt down the Tall Man. En route to Reggie's house, Mike has a premonition and frantically tries to warn Reggie seconds before an explosion kills Reggie's entire family. Convicted by Mike's precognition, Reggie agrees to accompany Mike. They break into a hardware store and stock up on supplies and weapons. Traveling northwestern country roads, they discover abandoned towns, pillaged graveyards, and a few of the tall man's traps. One is the apparition of a young woman's naked corpse. A gruesome encounter with a creature resembling Liz leads them to travel east towards the town of Perigord, Oregon. So yeah, that's the setup and the premise for Phantasm 2. As far as the cast goes, we have Angus Scrimm, of course, is the tall man. James James LaGrosse is Mike Pearson. Reggie Bannister is Reggie. Paul Irvine is Liz Reynolds. Samantha Phillips is Alchemy, and Tiger Kenneth Tagar is Father Myers. So obviously Angus Scrimm and Reggie Bannister returned from the first movie. Now, Mike Pearson was recast as James LaGrosse. I don't know how you pronounce it. James LaGrosse played him in this movie where I forget the actor's name in the first movie, the 12-year-old boy, but I know that was a little controversial. I know that he didn't like the movie, obviously, because I'm sure he wanted to be in it. But I think Don Coscarelli was given, I think the studio told him that you can only keep one of the two, Reggie or Mike, Reggie Bannister, the actor that played Mike. And so he decided to keep Reggie, and no offense to the actor that played Mike in the first Phantasm film, I thought he did good, but I think Don Coscarelli made the right decision. So it's unfortunate that he had that ultimatum, but anyway, that's just a little side note. Um, Overall, I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was a very solid sequel in the same way that Aliens is a really solid sequel to Alien. And there's some comparisons to be made between Alien and Aliens and Phantasm 2. Budget is certainly one. Horror movie versus more of a fun, entertaining action movie is one. Both of them sort of share those traits. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get into my review, starting with my pros or the things I liked about Phantasm 2. So I really enjoyed the direction this movie took. It's definitely more of a mainstream entertainment movie than what the first movie was. The first movie was sort of not really mainstream. It was more like obviously small budget. I don't know if I don't know how well it was or how well it did at the box office. I think it did pretty well, but it also had a budget of over only 300,000. This one had 3 million, and you can tell it really made a difference. But yeah, this movie's definitely more mainstream. The first movie was much more cerebral, much more sci-fi, sort of a mind screw or a mind job, if you will. This one's much more of a slasher, an 80s slasher road horror revenge kind of movie, in my opinion. But I really enjoyed that quite a bit. I don't think it would have been good to repeat the same exact beats as the first movie. I think that movie worked really well when it came out in 1979, and I think this movie worked really well when it came out in 1988. So both movies are really good, just for different reasons. So that has to be said. As I said, this one has a much higher production value than the original. You can see it in this movie by the effects, by the sets, by the camera work. The movie just feels bigger and broader overall. You know, they take it out of the small, sort of secluded area that it was all in the first movie. We basically had like three sets: the house, the cemetery, and the mortuary. And here they're on the road. They go, you know, different towns, different areas. I like the fact that the tall man travels throughout the country, wreaking his havoc. But yeah, this movie's just bigger. I'm not going to say better necessarily, but it's definitely a bigger, higher budget kind of movie. And in some ways, for this movie, I think that does work well. I really enjoyed the two remaining returning characters from the first movie, Mike and Reggie. Obviously, like I said, Reggie's played by Reggie Bannister, same as the first movie. Reggie's really ratcheted up in this movie and provides the best kick-ass moments as well as some effective humorous moments. I thought that the this movie definitely has more of a, it's not a comedy, but it definitely has some more black comedy kind of moments in it, and Reggie really brings that across the screen. It kind of works too because it sort of has that 80s, everything's bigger and more over the top, and you know he's got a chainsaw in his hand, and it just kind of works for that whole 80s timeline for when this movie came out. So, yeah, I really enjoyed the characters. And then Mike, who is played by a different actor, but the character's very determined, and you really believe that he's going to get this done as far as finding the tall man and taking him out. Really effective characters for me, those two main characters. Also, of course, anytime you talk about a Phantasm movie, you got to talk about Angus Scrimm. He is Phantasm to me. He is the tall man, obviously. Um, and he's fantastic in this movie, just like he was in the first movie. Doesn't miss a beat. Slides right back into that iconic villain role again. Definitely as good as he was in the first movie. He makes the villain in these movies work so well. His voice, the way he sounds, just everything about him is really. I just can't imagine another actor being in that character role, to be honest with you. And yeah, rest in peace, Angus Scrimm. You definitely left a horror legacy that'll never be forgotten. I really liked how they ramped up the side villains and the spheres in this movie. Much more of a beefed up army that the tall man has in this movie. In the first movie, he basically was the army, other than a few hands that you saw break through the mirror at the end. But I mean, it was really his movie. He was the one that was running the show, and he still is in this movie. But there's a lot more, again, because of the budget. There's a lot more side villains, and they could do more with the spheres as well. You got a gold sphere in this movie, and a couple of silver ones instead of just one silver one. Yeah, it just makes for a lot. It just makes for a lot of fun, for a fun ride. Basically, having those additional villains and some more for our protagonists to go against before they kind of get to the tall man, if you will. And so, yeah, I thought that worked, and especially the spheres because they're much more complex. They've got blades that come out now. They've got little drills that come out. So yeah, they really ratcheted up those spheres as well, and it's really awesome stuff. There's awesome kill scenes in this movie. The most notable one, of course, being the sphere that flies through the door and into the guy's back. Um, one of the Undertaker assistants, I guess, to the tall man. And so it rotates through his back and it comes out his mouth. And it's just the most iconic kill in this movie, maybe the franchise. I don't know. I haven't seen the last three movies yet, but I'm going to be hard pressed to find one better, I think. But that's just a really iconic kill. Really cool. Not overly gory, but gory enough, I think, to still be awesome. It's a really well paced movie, too. And that just has to be said that the movie's about over an hour and a half. It's an hour and 37 minutes, but it's a nice ride. It's a nice visual. You never look at your phone or at the clock or anything. It really is paced really well from beginning to end. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and it really flows well all the way to the thrilling climax of this movie. Of course, for a Phantasm movie, you got to talk about the movie score. It once again brings back that iconic theme for Phantasm, which I think holds true in all the movies. But besides that iconic theme, I like the rest of the score. It's different. It's more actiony, more in line with the pace and the tone of this movie as opposed to the first movie, which was more sort of secluded and less mainstream and less 80s, obviously, because it was a 70s movie. But yeah, I really enjoyed the score and I thought it worked well in this movie. And then my last couple final pros, I should say, is this movie has great practical gore effects, great makeup effects, but especially gore effects. Like there's a scene with the tall man towards the end where he's melting. Something happens to him and his body starts melting, and man, that's just kick ass, man. That's great practical effects again to go along with the kick ass practical effects that we got throughout the 80s, especially as it relates to gore effect. And then finally, I really enjoyed the end of this movie. It kind of calls back to the first movie where you're not really sure. It looks like they've won and they're all celebrating, and then some shit goes down on their way out of town, so to speak. And it kind of calls back into question what's real and what isn't, what's a dream and what isn't. And I thought they did a really cool way. It was really cool how they wrapped up with this movie the same way they wrap up the first movie, largely. A good comparison there. I just thought it was very effective, and I really enjoyed that before it cuts to ending credits. So, yeah, I really enjoyed Phantasm 2. Lots of pros about it. I don't really have a lot of cons. I do have a couple big ones. The first one is a pretty obvious one, and that's the fact that this movie's just not as scary as the first movie was. That's where the first movie has it over on this one. Um, this is much more of a fun and entertaining movie, which I really enjoy. But the first movie was very, very creepy, very eerie, very cerebral. Tall Man was kept more in the shadows. It was just scarier. And in this movie, it's a huge step down from the original as far as the scare factor goes. It just is. And that probably was somewhat intentional by the filmmakers and a bigger budget, but it just doesn't have those. It just doesn't have that tone that the first movie has, or those tension-filled, suspenseful-filled moments or images. Even like in the first movie, where the tall man is over Mike's bed. I'll never forget that scene. It stands out in my mind. And he's like floating over his bed as he's sleeping. So yeah, that's the biggest con I would say. And then also one that's not quite as big, but it's still noticeable. The tall man's screen time is cut down quite a bit in this movie, and as somebody who really likes Angus Scrimm in that role, that's definitely a disappointment. I know it was partially to make room, like I talked about, for those additional side villains, which I do enjoy, but I still think they could have had the tall man on screen more and more involved in some of the fights and the confrontations and stuff. I just would have liked to have had Tall Man on screen a little bit more than he was in this movie. But other than that, I can't really think of any other cons for this movie. I really enjoy this movie for what it is. It's again, the Phantasm 1 and 2 is a lot like Alien 1 and 2. Not exactly the same, but it's pretty close. I mean, from horror to more action and entertainment, more kick-ass action and entertainment. Same with this. The first movie's definitely more horror, more scary, more claustrophobic almost, where the second movie's bigger and broader and more special effects and more kick-ass characters. It really is a good comparison actually. But for what this movie is I love the first movie, don't get me wrong, but I'm going to give this one an 8.5 out of 10. It's a great sequel, great horror sequel. 8.5 out of 10 for Phantasm 2 from 1988. Go ahead and comment down below what you guys think of Phantasm 2. Do you like it as much as the first one? Less? Do you like it as much as I do? Why not? Comment down below. Please like this video and hit the little notification bell so you don't miss any of my upcoming reviews for the rest of this series. And please be sure to subscribe to my channel down below so you don't miss any of my great horror content. Not just the rest of this series, but some of what I have coming up beyond and into next year even. So I hope you enjoyed this review for day 20 of my 31 Days of Halloween Horror series. Hope everybody's October is going well. We're only 11 days from Halloween, and stay scared. Bye.